Anytime, Phil.
Welcome to the Computer Club's April meeting. I'm Phil Sorrentino, the Computer Club Secretary. Tonight we're going to have a presentation on home automation by Joe Farrow. By the way, there's an article on this in this month's journal on that very topic. So we'll get to our speaker in a minute, but first let me review a few things. Our monthly meetings are held on the second Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock. Typically they're from 7 to 8. Last month we explored technologies that led up to the smartphone. And next month the subject will be everything Google. So make sure you tune in if you have interest in the Google products. Also, you can join the club remotely from your home computer. Just go to our website, and that website is sccomputerclub.org. So there are 3 C's in a row there. Make sure you get them all in there. Just select membership and then scroll down to the bottom where you'll see new membership. For more details on that, you can just look at page 2 in the journal. And for those of you who are in Sun City Center, the lab is currently open from 12:30 to 4:30 every day except Sunday. Social distancing and masks are required. And as far as education goes, there are 2 classes scheduled for April, and 5 classes will be scheduled for May. Again, for details, see the appropriate journal for that. And finally, during the presentation, please submit your questions as you think of them using the chat feature. So now for tonight's presentation on home automation by Joe Farrow. Joe has worked at Microsoft for 20 years and has spent the last 5 years working with home automation and has a YouTube channel that explores home automation technology. Anyone interested, just go look for Geek Toolkit, the YouTube channel. So that's GeekToolkit. Joe has lots of knowledge, thoughts, and ideas about home automation. So here's Joe to present home automation, a view of the future that we can see today. Joe, it's all up to you.
Thank you, Phil. Hi, I'm Joe Farrow, and today I'm going to talk about this home automation topic that I'm very passionate about. I've been passionate. I'm a huge sci-fi junkie. I love Star Trek: The Next Generation. I remember when they had Captain Picard walk in the room and he said, "Computer lights," and the lights turned on, and I was just fascinated with that ever since. In today's talk, home automation is such an incredibly huge topic. I've decided to break it down by talking about concepts so that if there's something I don't cover and you run into it out there, you'll understand how it fits into basically this concept of inputs, outputs, and logic that really is the core of all home automation. There's lots of companies doing home automation. There's lots of approaches to it. And so what I want to do is keep things kind of generic so that we can go over the concepts so that if you do go into an ecosystem, you understand how it would apply. I also want to talk about the different technologies that are available. When we talk about inputs or things that get a computer data for home automation, there's lots of different devices, and we'll talk about those, switches and NFC and what that means. For outputs, we'll talk about things that home automation can control, everything from lighting to speakers to also just like notifications on your phone to let you know something's going on. Finally, we'll talk about the middle of this, the logic, the glue that holds it all together. These are called hubs, and we'll talk about how they can talk with services and artificial intelligence to do some really cool things for home automation. Finally, we'll talk about scenarios and putting this all together. This is where we'll actually talk about what you can do today with combining all these technologies. We'll talk about how cameras fit in, what the dashboards look like, and so on. The first thing I want to do is give you just a quick example. This is a picture I took from a YouTube video I did recently, and this is my room, basically in what I call my daughter mode. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, Jacinda, and I wanted to give her something magical when she walked into this room. There's a light switch under the Dumbo poster on the right-hand side there. That light switch is a smart home automation switch. What you're looking at is a television, and on the side of the television are devices I built called Dynaframes that are actually screens that can respond to home automation commands that can show playlists of images. In this case, I picked Disney images for those. And then also there's a computer on the left-hand side. That's actually the computer. This is where I'm sitting now talking to you. And then there's an red, green, and blue LED strip above that computer, and that's what's making that rainbow. The way this system works is when I walk in the morning when my daughter first wakes up, we let her watch a little bit of Disney Channel. To get that set up, I hit up twice on that light switch. That sends a special signal to my home automation system that takes control of the room. It turns on the overhead lights, which you can see there are 2 of the 4 lights that are in that room. It turns on the televisions as well and the Dynaframes, and then it sets it to the Disney application and the Disney posters on the side. The rainbow lights are actually animated. They come up on the left-hand side, and the background of my computer actually becomes a video of the fireworks for the Disney castle. This all happens with 1 light switch and 1 command. We'll talk about how that breaks down later, but this is just an example of something basic that you can do with home automation today that I would say wasn't even possible even maybe 5 to 10 years ago. It's come a long way very fast. Now, these are the basic parts of just about any computing system, and we're going to start out really basic, and then we'll add layers to this to get more complex. The input of this, if you think about your computer, the input is anything that gives data to the system. What I mean by that is if you think about your keyboard, the microphone, the webcam on your computer, even your mouse, these are all giving data to the system. What's cool about this is this works for almost any computing system. So you can think about a Raspberry Pi in this way. You can also think about home automation. It's just the inputs change a little bit. So an input for a home automation system might be a security camera, or it might be what's called an NFC tag. And we'll talk about inputs in a second. The middle layer is to take those inputs and actually process them and based on logic and basically make a decision of what you want to have an action or something that gets done. And then finally, the output is something that's going to communicate to you or to the scene, something that actually happens. This might be a notification on a phone. It might be lights turning on. It might be an alarm going off. Any of those are outputs. Now what I can do is I'll talk about each of these individually. And if I miss one, like say I don't talk about an input in this talk, but you learn about it later, you'll understand where it fits in the system and you'll understand how it can control a different output. So let's talk about what I call basic inputs. And they're basic not because they're simple, but basically they're more well-known. And then we'll get into the advanced ones that are probably a bit less well-known. Time of day is actually an input. If you think about it for home automation, the actual time, if I want to have my lights turn on and off at 6 p.m. or I want to have a reminder happen at a certain time, that time is an input that creates that action. So it's something to think about. The location of the sun is actually an input. This is really important for any automation that's going to happen on sunrise and sunset. So if you have a system that can take that as an input, then you can actually do things with sunrise and sunset. The location of the home that you're automating is also an input, and it's very important. As a fact, you can't really figure out the location of the sun without knowing the location of the home. What's really cool about this is when you put these together, you have the basics for the sunrise, sunset, turning my lights on automation, which is a great thing because we all know if you say turn the lights on at 6 p.m., it'll be right about half the year, but it changes over the year. So having it actually coordinate with the sun and your location to figure out when the sunset time is, and then having your lights turn on is a much more powerful way to do it. Now, voice, again, when I was watching Star Trek The Next Generation, that was science fiction, and now it's a $30 device on Amazon. It's amazing how far voice has come and all the technologies that are related that tie together. But you can think of voice as an input, voice activation for things, and the microphones that are involved in that. The light switch is an interesting one too, because you may not think of a light switch as a home automation device, but a home automation aware light switch can be controlled remotely. There's 2 different ways to turn on and off a light in home automation. One is you can actually talk to the light bulb if it's a smart light bulb. The other is to talk to the switch. Now, the cool thing about a switch that's smart home aware is it still works as a light switch if you're not there. And that's an important concept too. You really want to be careful with home automation and not automate your home out of usability for other people that may not be either into the technology or simply just aren't aware of it. For instance, if I replace my light switch with a tablet, then somebody comes in, they may not be able to know, they may not know how to use that to turn the lights off. So having a switch that works as a normal switch and works as a smart switch is a very important, just a basic idea, but a very important concept in automating a home that you have to really want to keep aware of. Am I going to automate my home out of usability of other people that live here or may visit? Motion sensors, I have one in the lower left corner here, and these can be used for both security, but also just room awareness. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the HVAC systems and how they can use motion to figure out where people are in the house and then adjust accordingly. Cameras, the lower right-hand corner, I did a YouTube video on this one that was called the Solium camera. What's neat about it is it actually has a solar panel on top. It's an entirely wireless camera. It sends the signal of the data over Wi-Fi, so this means you can kind of just attach it anywhere. You can put it on a fence post. You don't have to run any wires, and it will send you data. But security cameras are very popular in home automation, both for security, but again, also for some awareness. Now, microphones might sound like a duplication of voice, but actually microphones are used in home automation to actually differentiate things that can happen. An example is the Amazon devices are able to detect broken glass. And they're doing that by actually detecting the frequency of the break, and then they can actually do stuff with that. I have a baby monitor for my daughter, and it's really cool because it will tell me if she's crying versus noise in the room. Like I said, she's 2.5. So right now, if I put her down for bed, she pretty much gets back up and plays for an hour, and she makes noise. And it's kind of cool to not have to worry about those notifications. Now, if she's jumping on the bed, which she did the other day, and she falls, I'll get a notification that she's crying, and then I know I need to get up and go take care of her. The baby crying differentiation is another really smart thing that's involving audio processing to figure out, is this a baby cry or just banging around in the room? And I think that's really powerful. Advanced inputs, or just taking this to the next level. Smart locks, you see a smart lock here. It's the lock with the number pad on it. Now, smart locks have been around for a little bit now, but what's kind of cool about home automation with these is you can have different codes for different people that are coming up to your house that want to get into the house. So my wife and I can have different codes, both to unlock the door. What that does is that would tell the home automation system who is at the door, who's entering. And then we can use that as an input to actually make a decision and do something like maybe play a different song when we come in, so that I can have my music when I come home and she can have her music when she gets home, play when we walk in the door. The other thing about smart locks is it's always handy to know, did I leave the door unlocked? Well, typically you can check the state and lock it remotely. A scene switch is similar to what I was talking about when I was doing the Disney demo, or talking about the Disney demo at the beginning, of the concept of a switch that can change an entire room. And that's called a scene. This switch here in the upper left looks like a light switch, but it's actually a very special one. If you hit up on it, it will just turn the lights on. If you hit down, it turns lights off, just like a light switch. But if you hit up twice or 3 times or even 4 to 5 times, it will actually do different scenes based on those. The same with hitting down. What's cool about this is if I walk in or if I'm leaving for the day, I can hit down on the light switch twice to have it tell it to turn the entire downstairs off, or just hit it down once to turn just the lights that are near that light switch off. Those are called scenes. The other thing you know from the earlier talk and the earlier demo is the scene switch no longer has to control just the lights. You can actually control televisions, actually what inputs things are on, and a number of other points of the room. The light switch on the right-hand side is another version of light switch is another version of a scene switch, but that's actually one with a screen on it and a little computer in it that allows you to control the thermostat and other things. It actually has a camera on it, so if you have 2 of those switches, you can actually do it like use it like a voice intercom or a video intercom system inside of the home, which is pretty wild. Just switches have evolved and they can do more things now. Now the temperature and humidity, you see that sensor in the lower right, that actually is a 4-in-1 sensor. That little sensor there will not only give me the temperature and humidity of wherever it's placed, but also tell me the ambient light in the room and motion. There's a thermostat called the ecobee that can use a number of these. And what it does is really fascinating. Instead of the concept of just having basically the temperature where your thermostat is in a house, it can actually have sensors all over the house and detect where people are located. What that means is if I'm in my computer room that's typically 5 degrees hotter than where my thermostat is, it can detect that that's where the person is in the room. And then when I'm setting the thermostat, instead of setting it where the thermostat is, it'll set it where I'm located. This is really powerful when you have these throughout the house, and it's actually tracking where people are in the rooms and setting thermostats accordingly. That way, if you have rooms that tend to be a bit hotter or less, maybe ones with computers in them or TVs, or rooms that just are typically colder because they're in a different location, you don't have to worry about that. The thermostat can be aware of where you're located, track everything accordingly. GPS, now I talked about the location of the home being an input, but also the GPS coordinate of where your phone is can be an input. And this is typically used in what's called geofencing. Geofencing is the concept of taking a GPS device into an area that's defined and then having that do something. An example of this is I can tell my computer that my work is at a certain location. And if I'm within, let's say a mile of that GPS location, I'm probably at work. Then it can use my phone to track where I'm located. And when I go to work, I can have something happen like make sure the garage door is closed, maybe activate an alarm or a security system, or make sure my lights are off. So this concept of an input into the system of where you're located can also happen. I can also do something saying if the phone's over 10 miles away, maybe I'm on vacation, and set my house to a vacation mode. So this, again, this concept of where you are matters. NFC or RFID tags and bands. NFC stands for near field communication. It's quite a fascinating technology. The way it works is you've got what's called a tag, which is actually like a radio receiver, and it has no power source on it. So it looks like a sticker typically. And what happens is when that gets placed next to a transmitter, it uses electromagnetic induction to actually activate the receiver and give it power. And then the transmitter will send the signal down to that reader. This is used in grocery stores now. This is used in, actually Disney used them with what's called the magic bands. You'd have a band on your wrist, and when you scan the band, that's how these are working. And that's why there's no power source. They can make them waterproof. Very, very versatile technology. There's even a gentleman a while ago, he actually surgically implanted an RFID chip, which is very similar, into his hand. And he was bragging about how he could unlock his door or unlock his car by simply placing his hand on it. Now, I never really thought that surgically altering myself was the way to do home automation. But what I've shown here is these rings in the lower left are actually NFC rings. So I could put that on and have that do a very similar thing. That would have our NFC tag built into it. And I can put that next to a reader that would energize it, get the data, and identify as me. And then I could have that unlock something. So NFC is just another way to do this. There's also ways where you can put these on. I've seen these stickers put on posters. And then somebody would scan their phone to the poster and have it play music based on what poster they scanned, stuff like that. They can basically kick off any automation. Again, this is the concept of having it as an input. And we'll talk later about what these things can do as an output later. Power monitoring is another input. And what this is something that you would put on a breaker box or a circuit box to basically measure the power usage in a house. And there's a number of different ways of doing this, number of different approaches, but it's just the concept of energy monitoring in a house. You can use this for automations. You can also use this just for analysis, data analysis. Data analysis is a really popular thing in home automation because you kind of end up geeking out on your house and saying, okay, I want to know where my power is being used. I want to know what my internet bandwidth is doing. And so you end up with these dashboards that are not only controlling the house, but actually just as much giving you data and weather and temperature information throughout the house, stuff like that. And I'll show that later when we show dashboards. Okay, so now you've got all these inputs. What can you do with them? What can we control? Well, this is a number of outputs to just give you the concept. Speakers, if I use voice to say, tell me the weather, I can have the speaker tell me the weather. That's a term of output or a form of output. Sirens, like speakers, but more annoying, but really great for security. These are typically louder and very obvious, less security issue. So you can have a siren that gets activated based on what's going on. Now, screens, I'm going to mention this twice in two different ways. Screens, you can think about your phone. If I have a security camera and the output is my phone, then I can look at my phone and see what's going on that security camera. Or if I have motion happen, I can have a view of what's going on there. So you can think of your phone or a dashboard. The picture in the upper right there is a wall board or a wall dashboard where they've basically taken a monitor, mounted it to their wall, and they're getting their automation of their house. Now, this is actually an input and an output because it's a touch screen, but you can see there's some lights on the right they can control by touching. On the left, they can get things like the temperature in the house. They can control it like a thermostat, but they're also able to receive that data. I'll show better pictures of these dashboards later and what the different designs look like. It's a very big part of home automation nowadays to be able to look at these and use them to interact with the home. Smart lights are lights that can actually change what's called temperature color. If you think back to the incandescent lights that were kind of that yellowish color, and then you've got lighting temperature, it's measured in Kelvin, that will get it to be more of a white color or even a bluish. And we had LED lights when they first came out, they were kind of that bluish color. Smart lights can actually tune between those, which is really powerful, because if you want to have a more relaxing, like in the evening, you can go to a more of a yellow color. And then if you're working or cleaning, you could go more to that like white color. That's a lot more focused lighting. It's all about like limiting eye strain and deciding if you're in more of an active scenario or more of a relaxing scenario. These lights can actually tune that way. The other thing about a smart light is the light's individually controlled. So if you think about a roof or a ceiling where you've got 4 lights, smart lights, you can typically say, I want to turn one light on and leave the other 3 off and pick which one. And finally, there's smart lights where you can actually change them to any color, red, green, blue, and so on. And we'll talk about that when we talk about holiday scenes and controlling smart lights for that. Notifications, this is just similar to the screen, but basically like having a little alert on your phone. That's what I get for my daughter. She's crying. I get a little alert saying that baby crying is heard in the room. Also, you know, when my washer and dryer are done, they will actually notify my phone and my television. Actually, my television, I'll get a notification, which is really handy. If you're watching a movie, you get a notification saying the dryer's done, then I can pause the movie, go get the load, and so on. Wall plugs are simply, you can imagine swapping out your wall plug for a smart one, or there's ones that plug onto it almost like an outlet strip. What these allow you to do is actually turn on and off something. You think about like a bedside lamp that you want to control. It's a very inexpensive and easy way to get into home automation. And some of these will actually tell you the power usage of anything plugged into them as well. It's a great way to also automate something that's normally not easily automatable. Like if I want to turn my monitors off on my computer at, let's say 10 p.m. every night, I could just have my monitor plugged into a wall plug, and then that acting as an output would turn off. Okay, we've talked about inputs. We've talked about outputs. Let's talk about the middle, the logic. I keep saying, well, if this happens, then that will happen. How do we do that? Well, we do that with what's called a hub. A hub has 2 roles. One is it's where we define our logic to have the inputs talk to the outputs and basically say when we want to activate and what we want to activate. The other role of the hub is a translation layer. The thing I haven't talked about is all of these inputs speak a language, which is known as a protocol. Of course, being technology, these protocols compete, are different, and each have their own trade-offs. The 3 biggest ones that I'll talk about in this are Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a pretty standard transport layer protocol as far as how it gets around, but it's typically very proprietary on how the signal is communicated. The hub takes these languages and translates them so that all of these devices can work together, can be received and sent to the output layer. So not only does it do the logic, but the translation to hook these things together. Now, not every hub works with every device. Matter of fact, that limitation is kind of what's called the ecosystem. And so if I buy a device that works with Amazon's ecosystem and Google's, it may not work with Samsung's. And so that becomes a thing where you plan out your home automation system and you decide which ecosystem are you going to buy into. It's very similar to cell phones nowadays. You know, if you buy an Apple phone or a Google phone, you're probably going to have different accessories and so on that work with them. Home automation is very similar these days. Ideally, though, this is still light years ahead of where it was about 10 years ago, where everything was very granular or very siloed. You know, you do have standards. So Zigbee is a standard. And there are a bunch of manufacturers that talk Zigbee. The same with Z-Wave. That's an entire consortium of manufacturers, and each of those provides devices. So the great thing about today is you might be able to find a hub that can talk both Zigbee and Z-Wave and have access to thousands of devices on both the input and the output side. The other thing about hubs is they are processing locally. They can be on your network and process locally, but very often they'll also go out to the internet or the cloud for services. These services provide a number of things. The main one is they allow you to access your home from external. Now, a typical home network has what's called a router, and that router protects you from things on the outside talking to the inside of your house. Services or cloud services are typically a way for a home automation device to still be able to talk externally with hopefully some security so that you can actually do something like, oh, I'm not at home and I want to turn my lights off, or I want to unlock the door while I'm remote. So that's one of the top reasons you'll see the cloud or internet required. Of course, like anything, this is also a way for them to charge money. This is what they'll call an upsell. So sometimes the cloud service providers will charge more for these services, especially the later ones I'll talk about here in a second. Another one's advanced image and sound recognition. As powerful as computers are today, it would be hard to have a home automation system that would be reliably tied to a PC unless you planned it and you were technical enough to set that up yourself. So a lot of these will actually rely on the cloud. They'll send your image over to the internet to be analyzed to figure out something like, is there a package on the doorstep? This is the Ring camera, which was purchased by Amazon recently. They now have a thing where they'll detect if a package is there and they can notify you. The person versus car is one of my favorites because when Ring cameras were first coming out, and I got one for my parents, their camera faced right out the front door, but also faced towards the street. Every time a car came by, we'd get an alert saying something's out front. Now with the advanced image recognition, that image of something being moving can be sent off and analyzed, and they actually use artificial intelligence to come back and say, oh, that was a car, you know, we don't have to alert you, or no, I see a human being out front. What's really neat is they actually differentiate between a human, a car, and an animal. So sometimes you'll get alerts on your phone saying there's an animal out front. And then you get to see what the animal is. Baby crying versus noise in the room. I talked about this one with my daughter's camera. The other thing is voice recognition and voice synthesis. That means when the speaker talks to you. If you ever talked to your phone and said something like, I don't have internet access right now, and you wonder why can't it just answer you? The reason being is typically the way that works is you do voice to the phone sends it off to the internet to get recognized. It comes back to the phone with an answer that gets processed, and it actually is synthesized in the cloud. So then when it talks back to you, it's actually been processed over the internet. So if you get that, I don't have internet right now, and you're wondering why I can't talk, it's trying to synthesize a response that it can't do. So because voice, as powerful as it is, and as much as it seems like it's everywhere today, it still requires a lot of processing power to do it well, and the cloud can do it in a much more effective way. Facial and object recognition, this is the ability for security cameras to do things like detect, it's very similar to what I talked about with the package, if a person, an animal, or what's going on out on the camera image. Again, this is a cloud service where it gets sent out and sent back, and it says, oh, that was a person, or that's an animal. There's some really cool stuff going on out there in what's called deep learning, where it can actually detect not just animal, but it can differentiate between a bird, a horse, a dog, and a cat, and so on. So it's got a bit more smarts. And I used this recently for a thing where I wanted to have a camera. If it saw a bird, I wanted it to take a picture, but I didn't need my security camera to let me know there was a bird there. I could look through images of birds later. But if there was a person and it was after 10 p.m., I wanted it to actually send me an alert. So there was things there where I can use this artificial intelligence image recognition to do smarter things. Okay, so now we've talked about the inputs and the outputs, the hubs that process it, and the services. Let's talk about the evolution of home control and basically approach this from a different angle. And then we'll get to where we are today and things that we can do with all of this being put together. So we start out with the light switch. On, off, dimmers, you have the pull chains, the three-ways. I love the three-ways as a kid. I was always trying to see if I could trick them. You know, I'd pull them really fast and see if I could get the light to go to a different pattern. I was a very strange little kid, I guess. But I loved them. It was fascinating to me. How did that work? Why did when I pull the pull chain, it did something different? Then we got some motion activated switches. I have a picture of this on the left here. These were the ones where if you moved, you know, say you're carrying laundry, you walk in a room, the trigger of the motion would actually turn on the light. This is kind of the early form of home automation control where we can turn lights on and off automatically. Now, there's a couple of things about that. One is if it's late at night, you walk to the room, the lights would turn on full and be blinding. We'll talk about how that got better later. And the other thing is the early ones of these would turn on based on any motion, which meant if you had a breeze through the room and the wind blew something, you had the lights flickering. They'd turn on, they'd see motion. The newer ones use passive infrared, which is also known as a PIR sensor. That actually detects a big heat source moving, and that's how they work today. It works much more effective, unless you have large dogs, then they're setting it off anyway. The scene control was the next switch that was really kind of cool, because that was where you first had a switch where you'd hit a button and it would control multiple things. For instance, a kitchen's a great example of this. I might have under counter lights, I'd have overhead lights, and let's say I have pendant lights in my kitchen. I could hit a scene control and say, okay, I'm going to clean the kitchen, and it would turn all those lights on full. Then I would have another button. And by the way, in the lower right here, I have an example of a scene control, what this would look like. I could hit another button for, party mode, entertainment mode. And maybe that one turns off the under counter lights because we don't need those, and dims the overhead lights and uses the pendant lights to create a mood. This is an instance where I'm hitting one button and multiple things are happening, but it's not actually hooked up to any kind of other input other than that button. It's one input, one output right now. The next thing is voice control, and this is a modern thing here. We can use our voice to control scenes, to turn off lights, to turn off all of an area, all of downstairs, let's say, stuff like that. And then finally, we get to smart control. Smart control is where we have all of those inputs and outputs and hubs working together, and these are the scenes we can do today. For instance, with an appropriate hub, let's say, if there are no phones at home, turn the lights off. Well, how do we do that? We use geofencing. We say there's no phones that are on the local network. We can detect that, and then we can do some logic in our hub to say if there's no phones, then go ahead and turn off the lights. Vacation mode. This is kind of cool because this has evolved. Vacation mode used to be that the lights would turn randomly on and off. That's normally not very convincing if you've actually seen it, unless you really planned it out well. But what they're doing now is the systems will actually analyze your home and use artificial intelligence to detect what patterns you're likely to turn lights on off on what days and what times. Then when you go into vacation mode, the lights will actually turn on emulating the same way that they're normally on and off when you're there. That way they make sense and it looks much more realistic and much more convincing. After 10 p.m., turn lights on dimly. Now, I said I was going to revisit that motion sensor and why I don't like that. In the newer things, I can be much smarter and say, again, using an input of time, I can decide when a motion sensor sees me, do I turn the lights on full? Or after 10 p.m., maybe we just turn them on dimly so I'm not blinding myself. If I wake up, I hear a noise downstairs, or if I'm just going to get a snack or let the cat out or whatever, I can walk, set off the motion, and just have the lights turn on maybe 20% brightness, which would be much more pleasant. So it's just, again, home automation is a lot about conveniences. Holiday time, I did this with my Christmas lights a couple years ago now. The entire month of December, I didn't do anything. I basically had set up an automation. The entire month of December, one of my lights was red and one was green. Now I did that with smart lights. That was my output. They were able to change any color. And the input in that case was time. So that's, again, how the input affects the output. The logic was run on a hub that I use. It's called a Home Assistant hub that I built using a Raspberry Pi, and that controls my home and allowed that to happen. A friend of mine used an Amazon device for theirs, and I say Amazon, so I don't say the ALEXA word and set off everybody's home automation stuff. But the Amazon device, and he actually had it controlling a smart bulb. And for Halloween, when kids would walk up, he could detect motion and have the light flash and so on. So some really cool stuff there. Turning lights on and off at sunset and sunrise. Again, we talked about this a little bit with date location. These are all, again, where we got to today with the technologies we have available. Let's talk about other scenarios. What else can we do? If my clothes are done drying, I have a Samsung washer and dryer. It uses smart things, and it talks to me on my Samsung TV. It'll actually notify me on TV to let me know. That's what that looks like. You'll see ecosystem. Samsung stuff works really well with Samsung stuff. If you want Samsung stuff to work with an LG thing, this is where the hubs come in. You get a hub that can actually translate that language over. Packages are delivered. My Amazon devices all flash yellow when packages are delivered. It's really nice. I know now when it's something's out there. This next one was a feature. I wanted this forever, and I worked so hard for so many years to automate this myself. I was so glad that it became a thing. I use Arlo security cameras. A lot of security cameras that work with Amazon or smart Samsung devices can do this. You can view them on your television. That's super awesome. If you're watching TV, you hear a noise out back, to be able to pause the TV and have that be the security view. It's just, I found it really handy. It's also kind of cool if I have a party, back when we had parties, then my security cameras, I could have those on the TV and I could use that to monitor when people were arriving and so on. So just having that up on a television, that means that I've got screens all over the place that I can bring that up on. Now, of course, also I can bring that up on my phone. If you have an Apple phone and you go in the accessibility options of the phone, you can use, because again, Apple has HomeKit, they can do a lot of home automation stuff as well. There's in the accessibility, there's a multi-tap on the phone. And what happens there is if you tap on the phone 2 or 3 times, you can use that as an input to activate something. So I would actually activate certain scenes in my home by just tapping on my phone 3 times. In this case, I was mentioning dim the lights. That was my movie scene for a while. Be aware, though, that if the phone's in your pocket and you're walking around, that might imitate the 3 taps. And the other thing to know about the Apple phone is it will send that over the internet to anywhere. So I think I was walking. I was at work and I went out for a walk and I actually controlled the lights in my house when somebody was in my room. So if you add home automation to a system, you're adding technology to something that probably worked okay. So just like any technology, when you add it, who knows what, you're going to add some bugs. Motion detected in my backyard after 10 p.m. Record, and it's a person. Record it. Now it's important. 10 p.m. I'm using a time input. A person, I'm using artificial intelligence there to actually detect it's a person and not an animal running around. Then record the motion. I can also set a siren or an alarm because that might be alarming to me if somebody's moving around. I know I use 10 p.m. a lot. That's just kind of, if something's going on after 10 p.m. for me, it normally isn't me. So some more, the light switches, I talked about tapping up and down. So there's been advanced movie modes where you tap down on the light switch twice and it will actually close blinds, turn off computer monitors, and so on. So another scene that you can do. Again, this is an instance of a light switch doing a lot more than just turning a light off. NFC, I talked about NFC as an input. What can we do with that? Well, I can put a tag on my keys or maybe a couple of tags. And when I come home, I can decide what I want my house to be set to. So maybe I put, I'm feeling energetic and I want to put rock out. I can put down an NFC tag on an NFC reader and have that turn on music, turn the lights up and, basically set me up for the evening. Or maybe I want to be relaxed. Maybe it was a hard day at work. I can use a different NFC tag and have the lights dim, have calming music play, and something like that. So NFC tags to control scenes of the house or just that concept of coming home. Even without any home automation special stuff, if you have an Amazon or a Google device, you can set up what are called routines and say, when you come home, you can say, tell me about my day. And it can do a number of things from reading you the news to the weather to word of the day and so on. This next one I saw a lot from Europe. I don't know what it is about why I saw it so much from Europe, but it was basically the concept of changing lights to certain colors on trash day or recycling day. I guess the days were different there. But again, another thing, using a light as a reminder, having it flash a certain day, or maybe, when you have a certain thing that you need to do and alerts aren't enough, you want something more subtle or maybe less subtle, depending on where your light is. You can have a light change colors. And then detecting a person versus an animal. I think I doubled that one up, but just again, a concept of using AI for your security system. Scenes and routines. This is terminology that gets used a lot in home automation, and it's important to know it. A scene is when you set a number of things to a certain value. So what that means is, in this room, a scene might be, I set 2 of my lights to be full on bright, 2 of my lights to be dim, and I can save that as a scene and say, okay, that's my relaxing scene or my movie scene. And the reason that's important is that becomes a target that you can have an input trigger. Trigger means that would actually activate that scene. That's how I have a scene for my daughter. That was the TV and everything I showed at the start of this. When I hit up twice, I don't tell in the logic to do all of those things. I just say activate the kid scene. I have a movie scene. When I hit down twice, I say activate the movie scene. So if you see the word scene, if you get in the home automation, that's the concept is all of the things being a certain value. A routine is very similar. The word routine is in the Amazon ecosystem. And you'll see that, again, if you just have a smart speaker, you can start doing routines today. Routine can be a combination of scenes, but also actions. So a routine could be play music or tell me the weather or whatever. Like a routine can be more action oriented. I've got some examples up here of just the differences of like the concepts of these and what they enable. The last one I want to talk about for a second, light switches no longer control a circuit. This is an interesting thing that it took me a second to kind of break my head out of the confines of how things are architected to what is possible. When you walk into a home and you have a light switch, traditionally, if you're not using home automation, that light switch is wired to lights that are near it because it physically had to be. That was a limitation of how that architecture is put together. But with home automation, because things can communicate to each other and communicate back, that light switch no longer has to control just the lights that are next to it. If you ever had a light switch and you're like, why did they put a light switch here when it's right next to another light switch that seems to do a similar thing or turns another light on? You no longer have to be confined to that. Your light switch can control whatever you want. It can control music, TVs, lights. It could control the entire downstairs or upstairs or a room, or it can even control one light. If you get smart lights, you don't have to have every light turn on. You can have only individual ones. So the whole concept of not being limited by where you're at is a very powerful thing in home automation, and it's enabled by this. We're going to go through some dashboard examples. I'll go through these a bit quick, but I just want to show what it looks like for people that are using home automation. This is what's called the dashboard. And this might be on a tablet, this might be on their computer, this might be on their phone even, to see what it looks like. So this person here has the weather. They also have scenes. So you see good night, arrive home, and leave home. I'm starting on the left-hand side here. Those are scenes. So when he hits that, a number of things will happen. At the top here, you can see it says Alex is home and Svetic is home. These are using geofencing to determine their home. It might be using their router, or it might be using their phone to determine. He's also got he's got a Tesla, and he's actually tracking the Tesla, which is very home automation friendly to determine like things like battery level. A lot of smart cars are actually. He's tracking number of temperatures throughout his house, humidity as well. And then moving over, you can see 2 cameras on the top of the garage in his baby's room. So in this dashboard's a ton of data that's coming in that he can both control and inform him of what's going on in his home. This one here is a different a Samsung dashboard and an application that hooks into it. This is more of a media focused one. This one here, they're controlling TVs, turning TVs on and off. It looks like a fireplace. They've also got their lighting in the center. But this is much more media focused on controlling volume, playing music. They can actually target a TV and say, I want to send this over to that TV. Maybe they're having a celebration, or they're having people over for football. They can have all the TVs show football, and so on. So there's a number of things here that are controllable from this one dashboard. This is the final dashboard I want to show, but this shows a different concept. With phones nowadays, you can actually launch apps that will actually map your room. So in the lower right-hand corner, I want to bring your focus to that. What he's done is mapped his house and done a 3D view of the house and decorated it. It's almost like doll furniture. You put chairs here and TVs, but then he puts icons above each of them. And so if he wants to turn on his TV, he can hit the light bulb icon above the TV and control it. It's kind of a very intuitive way to have a dashboard control the house. I'm going to go back to the protocols real quick. I talked about Z-Wave and Zigbee and Wi-Fi. X10 was the technology that was used, I think, 10 or 20 years ago. And what it was a power line technology. It would send signals, and it was what I'd call fire and forget. You'd say, turn off the thing that was plugged into this X10 device that was in your wall. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. It wouldn't tell you. So it wasn't very reliable. There was no repeaters, and it was also phase-based. So in the US, where we split our power into 2 phases, it couldn't communicate across the phase unless you had special equipment to allow for that. Now, today we use Z-Wave and Zigbee as our RF communication protocols. These are what are called repeaters. And what's cool about that is if I put in a Z-Wave light switch or something that's powered by wall power, then every one of those I put in can be a repeater for the signal. So I can get throughout my entire house. They're also 2-way communication. So they'll let me know if they're alive, if it actually has network communication. And also they can tell me what state they're in. The Wi-Fi also is another technology. Now, Wi-Fi is fairly well known nowadays. It's kind of cool because you don't need any special hubs or anything for Wi-Fi stuff. If you get a Wi-Fi light bulb, then it typically can just be controlled over the internet with an application. They each have their benefits. I think it's cool. I do a lot of Z-Wave and Zigbee stuff myself. It's kind of neat. If my internet goes down or my Wi-Fi goes down, it doesn't affect my house functioning. My house still works. because that's on a totally different network. The other thing, I feel it's more secure because if I put it on a Wi-Fi network, then it's a bit easier to actually have that accidentally expose the internet. There's no Z-Wave and Zigbee is used for sensors, motion sensors, temperature, stuff like that. I haven't seen a camera be able to send video over it though. So if you get a camera, you're probably going to be on a Wi-Fi type system or an RF type system that's proprietary, something analog even. So be aware of that. But for light switches, temperature things, security magnets that you put above a window, you would probably go Z-Wave or Zigbee. The other thing about that is they're incredibly power conscious things. You can put a battery in, last for years. And so it works really well for security sensors. So you're not running around your house constantly changing batteries. Wi-Fi is very powerful, but it's not very power efficient. It's not very power efficient. Security cameras. I want to talk about these real quick. RTSP and OnVIF are things to look for if you're buying a security camera. The reason they are so popular or powerful is this means the security camera is not proprietary to a system, which means you're not buying into a system that will lock you in. Very many cameras that you find out there are not going to support this. You're going to want to look for these terms. What this means, though, if you have this, is RTSP means you can do local streaming, which means you don't have to go out to the internet to stream the video. It's very powerful. And also if you want privacy, it's also very fast. My Arlo cameras are not on this right now, and so if I need to look at my security camera, it takes 5 to 10 seconds to see what's going on. That really is way too long. It's the most anxious I can be if I hear a noise outside and I'm waiting 10 seconds for the video to come through. RTSP will pop up in about 2 seconds. I mean, it still takes a second to buffer, but it's much faster and snappier. OnVIF means that the camera can work with a back-end PVR. Now, the next thing I talk about is PVR is a personal video recorder. These are devices you can buy. They could look like the old school VCRs, and they record to hard drives typically. And what they do is they record video. Now, the way they talk to the camera is through the OnVIF protocol. What happens is the camera might detect motion, and it sends back to the PVR and says, start recording. PVR says, cool, I'm recording. Give me your video stream. The camera says back, okay, here's my video stream. They don't have to be the same brand because of the OnVIF protocol where they can communicate and say that stuff. PoE is a term. If you're looking for security cameras, you're going to see it's power over Ethernet. This is where you can actually power a security camera with one wire and get the networking off of it. So you'd plug a Ethernet cable into it. Now, if you don't have a power over Ethernet setup, you can get what's called an injector, and that will inject and power the camera. This is a really nice, convenient way to power cameras that are outside your house without having to run both power and networking out there. Just taking time real quick. So in conclusion, home automation is about convenience. I had somebody on the internet tell me one day, they were like, well, we do home automation to save money. I don't agree with that at all. I had a 97-cent light switch from Home Depot that worked perfectly fine, and I replaced it with a $120 computer, a $40 light switch to talk to it, and then I think I've spent $50 on the dongle to get them to communicate. And now my 97-cent light switch I can turn on and off with my phone. So I would not say this is something to save money, but it is a fun hobby, and it is, you know, if you're like the futurism of it, if you want security, there's a lot of security things in home automation, stuff like that. But it is still an expensive hobby, and it's something that requires technical planning to do right. I know that I scratched the surface of this. I've got hours and hours of videos on my YouTube channel covering home automation, and even after 80 videos, I still only scratched the surface. It's just an enormous, enormous topic. Well, my goal here today, though, was hopefully you understand how things are situated, you understand what the parts are, and if you want to research it more, you've got places to go to figure that out. I really appreciate you watching this video, and if there's any questions we can relay, I think we've got like 10 minutes.
No, it doesn't look like we've got any questions yet.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, you mentioned smart locks at one point. I would imagine a lot of people are concerned about the security associated with them and how long a PIN or password that you can set up.
Yeah. Rightfully so. Rightfully so. So I've gone to the hacker conference in Las Vegas, DEF CON, a number of years, and they just basically will go through every smart lock and show how to bypass them. It's, it's honestly though, they also show how to get through normal locks too with lockpicks. Yeah, it's absolutely a security concern, and it's absolutely something that should be thought about very well. And I would probably only advise it if somebody was very technical and understood what they were risking and had done the research on the locks. But honestly, even with the research, I give them 6 months to a year of being out before somebody figures out a way to buy them. The scary thing about a smart lock is somebody can unlock it without you seeing them. If somebody's picking your lock, they're physically there at the lock. With a smart lock, it's when they were hacking them at DEF CON, they were doing it from 300 feet away. They would basically use a pole as an antenna, a metal pole, and they were bouncing the signal through the pole, and they would be able to talk to a Bluetooth lock. So the Bluetooth lock would say, well, since I only work 8 to 12 feet away, somebody would have to be close to hack me. Well, they were showing that, no, I could be 300 feet away, still get a signal bounce to it, and override it. So, yeah, I would absolutely be concerned about smart locks.
Yeah.
Joe, I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, could you mention your YouTube channel again?
Sure. It's Geek Toolkit, and let's see here. It's Geek Toolkit on YouTube. I don't have a website. So it looks like this. And I've got a section here. This is me talking about the smart switch and installing it that I did. This is me talking about the different frames that I did. And then I've got things like this. I have an entire video on nothing but smart lights. And when I started making that video, I thought, this is dumb. I don't know if anyone's going to like this. And it actually has gotten quite a reception. And also, it's 22 minutes long on just talking about lights. But there's that much to it. There's just a lot to this technology.
And Joe, where can you purchase some of these products?
So I typically start on Amazon and search, and then I'll find a brand and use the reviews there, and then I'll search for the brand to find the brand's website. So for instance, Innovelli is a brand that I've really appreciate the work that they put in. They use Z-Wave light switches. So Innovelli.com would be one of them. For security cameras, Reolink has been amazing, and Hikvision is another. It's kind of interesting. They're brands that you may not, it's not like a GE or a Samsung or something. There's a lot of these smaller brands that I hadn't heard of that specialize in it. But home automation still kind of has a niche for people that want to have full control over their equipment. And if you have somebody like a Samsung, they're gonna be more about, how do I monetize the cloud, or how do I monetize basically get you into a new service model where you're paying another monthly bill. So you can also go to Samsung, Amazon, if you search for their products, or Google for their products, their ecosystem, they'll tell you about other manufacturers that work with their hubs, basically.
All right, very good.
Joe, there's one other question about a hub. Is the website IFTTT, I guess, if this, then that? Mm-hmm. Is that equivalent of a cloud hub?
Yeah, you could consider it a cloud hub. It's that's actually a good way to look at it. If this and that is a very powerful setup. The challenge right there is it used to be a free setup, and so a lot of people depended very heavily on it and built entire infrastructures of their homes around it. And then they changed their licensing to be only three logic things for free. So be aware of that. It ends up being a paid service hub, but it's also a very easy way to get into some basic automations.
Okay.
Well, very good.
Well, and I guess would you consider a Roomba vacuum cleaner part of home automation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's another example. I mean, I was going through, I'm guessing there's a dozen things I forgot to mention. Roombas definitely. And what's cool about that is you can tie a Roomba into a home automation system to do something like, when my phones are not at my home, then vacuum, instead of trying to like schedule it around your routine or have it go off in the middle of the night like I do. So.
Well, great. Any other questions that you have, Bob?
No, it doesn't look like it.
Okay, well, Joe, thanks very much for a very informative presentation on home automation. Actually, it looked like you were having more fun than a lot of people. It seems like you really enjoy the hobby.
You absolutely have to, because the day that your significant other says, "Why is the house broken?" And you've given yourself an IT problem, then you have to enjoy it to stay with it.
You better have some answers.
Right.
Well, thanks again for a presentation on this very fascinating subject. Just let me mention that people who are watching, don't forget that our next meeting will be on Google products on May 12th. And we're looking forward to having everyone watch that presentation. So good night and stay safe. And thanks again, Joe.
Thank you, everyone.
Joe.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bob.